Okay, guys.
Forgery or authentic?
Here we go. We're going to look into the Shroud of Turin. So, disclaimer. This is not about whether or not Christianity is true. Our faith is rooted in the witness of the first disciples of the risen Jesus and the assurance of his victory over death that has been passed down through the generations and experienced in each of our lives. Whether or not the Shroud of Turin is authentic, evidence for Christianity remains overwhelming. Ultimately, trust in the person of Jesus is the point of it all. So, this is not whether or not this is real, it doesn't shake our faith, but I would like to present the evidence as to why the Shroud of Turin is the coolest archaeological artifact I've ever heard of and why I believe that it is authentic. You ready? So here we have some biblical data on the shroud. So we have it mentioned in all four Gospels at some point that there is the existence of a linen shroud. Here in Matthew, Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen shroud, and placed it in his own new tomb. In Mark, Joseph bought a linen shroud and wrapped him in the linen shroud. In Luke, he wrapped it in a linen shroud. And in John, they took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen cloths. So in all four Gospels, there is a distinct note that there is the existence of this shroud. And then in Luke, after the resurrection, when Peter goes to the tomb, he sees the linen cloths and went home marveling what had happened. In John, Simon Peter came, following him, went to the tomb. He saw the linen cloths lying there and the face cloth, which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen clothes, but folded up in a place by itself. So these are multiple repetitions of the fact that there is this linen shroud. They noticed it. It was significant, right? In Galatians, Paul writes, "O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? It was before your eyes that Jesus Christ was publicly portrayed as crucified." Now, why would he say that to the Galatians? They did not witness the crucifixion of Jesus, right? These are Greeks. This would be decades after Jesus. And yet Paul says it was before your eyes that Jesus Christ was publicly portrayed as crucified. Kind of interesting. Remember that.
Very.
So what is a shroud? A shroud is simply a large linen wrapping used in proper Jewish burials during the 1st century. A shroud would be wrapped around the body from head to toe, with the head placed at the middle of the cloth and the remaining half of the cloth being folded over to fully encompass the whole body. Strips of linen would also be used to keep the shroud tied and snug to the body. So you can see here this image of the body wrapped in the shroud. So here the man would lay, and then it would wrap over his head, and then they would tie it with strips. Okay? So, the craziest thing about the shroud is that it is actually a photograph. And to understand this image, you have to understand the idea of a photonegative. Kevin would probably know what I'm talking about. In traditional film photography, images are created when film stock is exposed to light. In that instance, a record of the light rays is recorded, but with the lights and darks inverted. So you can see that down here and in this image. The light and the darks are inverted. This is what happens with the photonegative. And in order to achieve a version of the image correct to true life, the negative must be reverted in development. So when you flip the colors of the image, the negative becomes a positive, and you can see the true image that was recorded. Does that make sense?
Yes.
You guys following?
Yes, it makes sense. Mm-hmm.
So, what's amazing about this image is that this is the first photonegative that we have record of. It was not understood about the shroud throughout history until the development of photography. The image on the shroud is actually a photonegative. This means when you take a film photograph of the shroud, acquiring a negative image, you actually get a positive. The first person to discover this in 1898 was shocked when he discovered this. So he took an image of the shroud, and when he went to go develop the film and he saw the photonegative, he was shocked to find that the image actually came into clear resolution because the colors had been inverted. And this is significant because this was thousands of years before the technology, photographic technology, was invented. People did not, they didn't conceive of this kind of art, and there is no pigment on the shroud. So I'll get into that. They've done extensive scientific research on this artifact, and they have found no dye or pigment or paint or anything like that that is causing this image. So they don't really know what is creating the image. There's no sense of like artistic drawing. So the historical trail for the shroud goes back, according to consensus, from most people, at least 700 years. If the shroud is indeed a forgery, how could it be that it was forged to be a photonegative 600 years before the technology of photography was ever invented? So the consensus between scholars, Christian and non-Christian, is that this is at least 700 years old, but we have evidence that is much older than that. But obviously, before any of this technology would have existed, right? So this is what they saw when they took an image and they reversed it. You can see the difference, how it comes into clarity when you swap the darks and the lights. Suddenly, you can see an image of a person. So the details of this artifact are incredible and numerous, and I'm just going to go into some of them real quick. So you can see there is depicted here a crown of blood. There is actual human blood on the shroud. There is evidence of a broken nose. There is a side wound here where there is not only blood, but also water. There are wrist wounds here. You can see the blood stains. Unbroken knees. These triangles you see here are from fire damage, so this would have been folded up, and these would be the corners where this artifact had been through a few different fires and was rescued, but it had been singed, so causing these holes, and they had to be patched. There are ankle wounds here on the feet with blood. The body is in rigor mortis, so that is when the muscles are tensed in the initial days following death. The thumbs are clearly folded under, and the body is stiff, as would be a body that had just died. There are scourge wounds on the back, and you can see these are from floggings, and as I mentioned, crown of blood. So these are just the details having to do with the image on the shroud. And these are agreed upon by scholars who have spent thousands of hours studying this. These are the things that they have learned about this. So, as I said, this has been studied extensively. In 1978, a bunch of scientists entitled STURP spent an extended period of time forensically analyzing the shroud to investigate its authenticity. The scientific team included researchers from various different fields and came from a variety of backgrounds. So this, the shroud was allowed to be studied by rocket scientists, weapons specialists, some of the top scientists in many different fields, doctors. They came together and they put this under extensive analysis. These are just, this is a list of some of the people who worked on this. It's pretty incredible. They discovered many fascinating things about this artifact. So as I mentioned before, the image on the shroud, it's not composed of any paint, dye, ink, rubbing, or any artistic medium. There is no trace of any of that in the fabric itself. There are real blood stains on the shroud, and the blood is human male blood type AB. So they analyzed the blood. It's real human blood. The blood is from a man who was tortured before his death, evidenced by the excess bilirubin in the blood. So the color of the blood is more vibrant than you would expect. You would expect it to be dark brown or black for ancient blood, but it's actually still tinged red, and that's because there were high amounts of bilirubin in the blood, which is evidence of physical trauma. at the time of death. The bloodstains match precisely the descriptions of the wound of Jesus presented in the gospel accounts. So whether or not this is Jesus, we know that this is a real burial shroud of a person who was crucified around this time. Okay? So the STURP research team also found that the image of the body and the face is created via aged fibers, which are found on the very top of the linen weave, resembling something like the effect of an atomic bomb shadow. It seems like there may have been a sort of radioactive exposure involved in the creation of the image. So what actually creates the darkness of the fibers is actually aging. So the very top fibers of the weave are aged, and so they're darkened. And this doesn't make sense from any perspective that is other than some sort of radioactive exposure that would age these fibers. So you can see here an example of the image created after an atomic bomb explosion, how it creates a radioactive shadow almost. So that's similar to the effect being caused on the shroud here. So carbon dating, there was carbon dating analysis done from the very corner, the very edge here, in the 80s, I believe, and or it may have been earlier than that, but the carbon dating seemed to debunk the shroud as authentic. The carbon dating process for the shroud, however, has come under considerable scrutiny since then. So they came out with the results from the carbon dating. They said, no, it only dates back to the 1200s or 1300s. And so clearly this is a forgery. But one argument against the validity of the carbon dating is that the piece of the shroud used in the test, the left corner edge, has been exposed to various biological elements over the centuries and gone through repairs that would naturally skew the dating. So they didn't want to destroy the central image, so that's why they took from the very corner. However, this would have been the area that was handled extensively throughout the years, and it actually was repaired. It was sewn with cotton patchwork from later dates. So this would obviously skew the carbon dating. It would make it appear to be newer than it actually is because they didn't get an accurate sample of the original cloth, right? So something else that's really interesting is that we have art depicting the edge of the shroud being handled and held by its edges when displayed to the public. So there are records throughout history of this artifact being shown at public displays throughout the Middle East, throughout Europe, and people would take it out and there would be public viewings of this artifact. So this is a well-documented fact that we have evidence that this image has been circulating for a long time. We have something called the Prey Codex. This is a piece of Hungarian art from the 12th century. Another argument against the validity of the carbon test is that there are depictions of the Shroud of Turin in art that predates the results of the carbon dating. So this image here is from the 12th century, and it clearly displays the image of Jesus as depicted on the shroud. So normally in artwork, Jesus would not be portrayed as naked. He would be portrayed with short hair. He would look much different. Yet this image from the 12th century shows Jesus much like he appears in the Shroud of Turin. But this is earlier than what they said the carbon dating of the shroud was. So it doesn't make sense that we would have artwork portraying the shroud that is older than what the carbon 14 dating said the shroud actually is. And if you'll notice here, the Prey Codex, that piece of art, has holes in the weave pattern of the cloth that matches the Shroud of Turin. These are burn marks in the cloth that were depicted in this piece of art. Exactly, you can see they exactly match. All right. So then we have another evidence for the early witness and reverence of the shroud by the church is its supposed part in the development of this influential image of Jesus from the 6th century. This icon, one of the earliest standardized images of Jesus in history, matches the shroud's notable asymmetry in a remarkable way. So this is from around 550. It's called Christ Pantocrator, and this is a very famous image of Jesus. Again, it is different than a lot of early images of Jesus, who was portrayed with short hair and looking more Roman. This is clearly a Middle Eastern man with a beard, long hair, and the way that his face looks is very similar to the image of the shroud. So you can see here that it's very asymmetrical. If you look at one side, it makes his face very thin and long and more squished. And if you flip the other side, you'll see that his face is more wide and it looks quite different. So it's very asymmetrical. And if you compare that to the shroud, you can see something very similar. So looking here on the left, you can see his face is thin and long, and here it's much more broad. Going back here, so look at this first image, long face, very similar. Look at the second image, more wide face, very similar. So the asymmetry also matches of the face in this artwork. It also has 3D topography. So they analyze it through a special scanner that can sense the lights and the darks and basically create a three-dimensional image showing showing height and depth. And it contains puzzlingly accurate topographical information that allows for anatomically correct reconstructions of the image. If the shroud is a forgery, how would an artist from the 14th century be able to accomplish this? So it's incredible. Most photographs, if you just put a regular picture in this scanner, it will come out with a result that does not look anything like this. But you can see that it actually captured a three-dimensional image when it scanned into this machine. So it's kind of wild. We also have the Sudarium of Oviedo, but this is traditionally held to be the face cloth of Jesus's burial. And actually, the bloodstains on this cloth match the bloodstains found on the Shroud of Turin. So this is, if you'll remember in the Gospels, it mentions that Jesus was buried in the shroud, and there was also the face cloth, which was separate. And this has been passed down through the centuries and is believed to be the face cloth, and the bloodstains match perfectly the Shroud of Turin. So this is a 3D rendering based off of the shroud of what this man might have looked like. Though the shroud has a long history, the discovery of it being a photographic negative in recent centuries, as well as the STURP research findings, has made it more popular than ever. If the shroud is indeed authentic, could it be that God mercifully granted a generation that is more image influenced than any other, an image of himself? So, pretty incredible rendition of what this person would have looked like. You can see just another example of an artist clarifying this image here. So I also want to mention before I go forward is that they also found some historical data within the fibers of the cloth. They actually found pollen that dates to the springtime in Judea or in Jerusalem. So the pollen fragments that are on the shroud actually correspond with pollen that would naturally be in the area of Jerusalem around this time. And they also found certain soil or dirt that they chemically analyzed and found that it matches with the soil in the area as well. So these are super fascinating details to me. So what we already know about the Passion of the Christ, you might say, why would God leave this if we might idolize it? You know, why would he leave an image of himself? Why would he give us this? It must be a fake because people wanted to create this, right? But just think about all of the evidence that we have already. We have the city of Jerusalem. And in the city of Jerusalem, we have the Garden of Gethsemane. This is a real place. We know these places exist. The traditions have been passed down to us. We can trace them to these exact locations. We know the dungeon where Jesus was held. This image actually we took on our trip there. But we know that, Caiaphas's house, the location where Jesus was imprisoned, we know where that is, right? We have data showing that Jesus's crucifixion outside the city walls would have been in this basically quarry, rock quarry. The Romans favored highly visible places for crucifixion, which would be a grim warning to rebels. We know that the crucifixion site was outside the city, and the tomb would have been very close nearby. And we have evidence that they constructed a church over this site, but preserved these locations throughout the centuries so that we would still be able to visit them today. So obviously it looks much different than it would have, but we believe that we have the location of the tomb and of Golgotha where Jesus was crucified. And this is, you can visit it. I touched it. You can see it here underneath the glass. You can still see the indentions where they would have fitted crosses into the rock. The Holy Sepulchre, you can see here, this is when they did some excavation of the tomb and they found a marble slab that would have been, or a limestone slab, I believe, would have been where they laid the body of Jesus. And so, if we have all of these things, why not this? It's perfectly plausible that this could actually be genuine and could actually be the face of Jesus. That is my conclusion, and I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to ask any questions. Let me know what you think about that, Kevin.
Everybody give a round of applause.
Wow, so beautiful. So
Wow.
I'll let you make your own conclusions. But for me, I think of, Occam's razor, whatever conclusion, however it goes, whatever conclusion makes the most sense or seems the most obvious is the simplest. And to me,
whatever the simplest answer is the right one.
Yes, reverse that. To me, it seems like all the details fall into place so perfectly that it seems wild to imagine that this could be like the craziest forgery ever. And so I just think it's really cool. Questions?
I think I want to talk about the Galatians verse, right?
Yeah.
Like, is there more verses that kind of back up that theory? That, I guess, the theory, or not theory, but what would I say? What am I trying to say? Eric, you're good with words. What am I trying to say?
No,
it's good.
Yeah,
I can hop in actually to say that, because the point of the Galatians was more speculative.
Yeah.
Really, it's the other verses that are the most impactful as biblical data evidencing, at the very least, the gospel writers found it worthy mentioning in all four gospels not only the purchase, but in Luke and John, the finding of the shroud. So the general assumption is, for shroud proponents, why in the heck are they taking so much time to mention it when it's not really a necessary detail of the story? As you know, the Gospels, they don't contain any details that are unnecessary. Every detail, they actually lack so many details. So if Jesus was buried and the original hearers and writers know that he's buried, there's an assumption there that he was buried as people are buried, that they're wrapped up in shrouds. The fact of the matter is, the shroud is mentioned not just in the burial, but also in the resurrection story itself, in the finding of the empty tomb. So why are they writing it? Why are they mentioning it is the question. And then even if, they didn't mention the finding it, wouldn't you assume that Peter and John, like, why wouldn't they take it? Even, I guess, is the main thought. It would make sense. You would expect that there would be a legacy of these artifacts throughout at least early church centuries, in the same way that we know where certain locations happen, especially because those things are mentioned. there's priority that the gospel writer is giving to those details. Is the point?
Yeah, I never even thought when it mentions like the cloth and stuff. I never even thought to assume like that.
The question
Possibly
is why is the gospel writer mentioning it? You could just say, well, it's just in detail. It's just a detail of the story. But again, when you analyze these details of the stories, they often have a purpose. And the fact that all four gospel, like Luke will mention certain details based off of his intentions that rather than Matthew, right? But all four of them mention it. So it's almost as essential as the resurrection story itself, as far as one of the details that you mentioned: the empty tomb, the cloth, the spear. It's part of the narrative. It's part of the narrative generally for the gospel writers.
It's another piece of evidence, and it only feels like the most natural thing in the world that if you were running into an empty tomb where someone you believe was dead had disappeared, you would so naturally go to take the cloth and to show people this is the cloth he was buried in, right? Like that just feels like so instinctual, you know.
The Galatians passage was very much more speculative and just kind of a tack on to what is the biblical data found in the Gospels.
So I guess I would say it's not heresy entirely.
Not entirely.
It's fake, bro.
Not entirely.
All fake.
Bro,
what do you think, Frank? What do you think?
I missed it.
I know, I missed a lot of it.
No, you missed all of it. You caught the very end.
My whole thing with the shroud that I was skeptical, the only thing is that when you read in the gospel, it talks about he had a face covering or something, right? But you guys said that they do have the face covering also.
Yes.
So is there a picture of that, or did you present that?
Look at my screen. I'll go to it.
All right.
You can just...
She's like, let me just show you real quick. Boop.
You see that?
That's it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's called the Sudarium of Oviedo. And this is what has been traditionally believed to be the face cloth. And the bloodstains on this match in type and shape to the bloodstains on the shroud.
Is there any like side-by-side picture of like this and the shroud?
I didn't put that in the presentation.
Is this face covering supposed to be like, is he wrapped in the shroud and the face coverings over the shroud? Because it's like, well, why isn't his face on this piece? You know what I mean? That's my only thing. Is just like, well, why isn't the face on that? You know what I mean? That piece. But it would make sense if it's not.
Frank,
on
we'd have to explain to you how the image was created for you to really understand what is unique about the image itself. It seems like it was like an exposure of radiation. It becomes a photographic negative.
Right.
So something miraculous
and
happened anyway.
But assuming that there's no image on the face shroud, you would assume probably that the shroud was was underneath the head covering, right? Just because the top layer of the, assuming it didn't go through layers of fabric, right?
It
did not.
It depends on whether or not the radiation, if this is from the resurrection, if the radiation is coming from his body or going into his body. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Brent brings up the exposure to what's it? The negative point. Like, how did that actually happen? Like, was there like a flash of light?
Yeah, it's really interesting.
That's the theory.
That is the theory, because the only the topmost fibrils of the shroud are aged, so it doesn't penetrate deeply into the fabric as a paint or a dye would completely saturate, right? It's just the very top, so just the part that was touching his body. So that's that is the theory, because they have tried many times to recreate this in a lab, and they have been unable to recreate the effects of this. They've used many different methods, and what they believe at this point is that it must have been some form of radiation that aged the fibers, such as from a blast of, which is what I imagine is a flash of light and some sort of radioactive energy raising Jesus from dead, and whatever that would have looked like would have transferred to the fabric, if that makes sense.
So is it Christ's glorified body that made the image?
Yeah, that's the theory.
Because again, it's a photographic negative.
And something.
There's no explanation.
Yeah.
Something else. Yeah. Something else.
That was a good point too. I would say that was a
Something
really
else
good
that
point
is
when you said.
really interesting to me is that when Jesus appears to Mary in the garden, she reaches out for him and he says, "Don't touch me." And he's specific to tell her not to touch him. And I just think very, obviously this is total eisegesis, but imagining what if there was some form of radioactive power in his body that was animating his resurrected body, that almost like it was too powerful for her to get near him, if that makes sense.
He's the doctor and he hasn't finished regenerating yet.
It's true.
I just think that's really interesting.
Again, even regardless, the fact is the image, there's no understanding of even how the image can be created. The fact that it's a photographic negative, supposedly, if it is a forgery made 600 years before photography is even invented, I mean, that's a miracle in and of itself, even if it's a forgery. That's crazy. So if all the bloodstains match, if the bloodstains are authentic human blood, if,
Right, and the fact that they haven't been able to reproduce it with our modern technology, so.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like, we have no idea how it's created. The best assessment, again, like a photographic negative, like how you're gonna say some medieval artist made a photographic negative, like what?
Yeah.
It's
No, that was a really good point for me, where the fact that it was created, that there was a negative photo that was like 700 years before even the conception of like a camera and stuff like that. So
exactly.
Yeah.
that was a really good point for me. I was like, that kind of was like, oh dang, that's very interesting.
It's pretty wild.
Well, and the blood is
It is pretty wild, to be honest.
real human blood. I mean, that's all the bloodstains match. And again, the question is, it's the simplest explanation. It's like, it'd be such a wild story to say that this is a forgery. Like, how could someone come up with this?
All right, I got another question.
I was gonna say, okay, I was also gonna add that it's really interesting, almost like an X-ray. Like in an X-ray, you can almost see teeth here.
And the bones in his hands.
And the bones in his hands. Do you
Wow, I didn't see that or notice that. That's wild.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, that was cool too.
Yeah, and the bones in his hands here, you can kind of see almost like his skin is sort of translucent. It's really interesting. What was your question, Frank?
Ben has a question as well.
My question was, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this story from Mexico about the Guadalupe that appeared to this dude supposedly, and it's in like a church there that this image miraculously just came on this image. It's like the Mexican Virgin Mary image. Do you know what I'm talking about? I mean,
yeah.
Do you guys know anything about that whole story? And like, is that similar? I mean, I'm not comparing it to this, but okay, I guess I kind of am. Like,
I can mention it. Or I can.
You know what I'm talking about, though?
I do. Yeah, that is nothing like this. Yeah, that is nothing like this. Like,
no, but I was gonna say, like, did they test that piece of cloth or whatever to the extent of like the shroud and like?
I don't think they did, but that image, it's not.
Oh, I'm not buying that one, bro. I'm not buying that at all.
It's just the nature of that image is not the same at all. I think is the point that we're trying to make. Like of it being a photographic negative of it. Like, I mean, I haven't done extensive research into it, but it's not comparable. Is I guess the point I'm trying to make. The shroud is extremely unique in kind of its makeup, even just chemically. But Kailyn, what was Ben's question?
Ben's question was, what's the significance of the blood type?
Yeah, so the AB blood type, it's just a sort of a rare blood type, and we know that it was from a human male, and the blood on the shroud matches the blood on
The blood type matches.
The blood type and the blood stain pattern that matches the face
blood.
cloth.
What's interesting about the blood stain pattern is it actually fills in gaps on the shroud as well, so it matches and also fills in gaps. So
right.
It's like a puzzle almost.
Anyway,
there's no like writings about like say like the apostles carrying the shroud around, or like, is there any like written stuff about it? You know, like church history.
Frank, so there are mentions that would have been good to put, but we didn't have time to put this in. I mean, we just worked on this like today, so we could probably do more. But there are citations of like the Shroud of Jesus throughout church history.
And what's the like earliest account of that? Do you know?
Right. I don't know. I know that there are. I just haven't. I haven't done the. Well, Kailyn, I would want. I don't want to get a specific person, a specific like because they have data on everything.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't just Google it because there was.
Well, there's like I think from what I remember, I feel like there was like an oral history at least for a while, and then.
History, but then there's also mentions.
There's mentions. Yeah,
right.
in letters between people.
Anyway.
They write
like
about
people
it,
mentioning that they saw the shroud or whatever.
It's not always called the Shroud of Turin because it's only starts being called the Shroud of Turin once it ends up in Turin and stays in Turin for all history.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not called the Shroud of Turin. It's called, the burial shroud of Jesus or whatever it's called, or the shroud of this place or whatever. In the same way that Sudartium of Oviedo, it's just a name for this piece of cloth that resides in this place. So
yeah, but it was preserved and passed around throughout history, and there are records of it showing up. People would they would have like public viewings of the shroud. They would hold it up during church services as an image, and so there's definitely like a lot of evidence of it being preserved and venerated like throughout the centuries.
Tyler, you're super into this topic.
My what?
You're super into this topic, so what'd you think?
Yeah, I mean, what I think it's cool.
No, I mean, like, did she do a good job? In your
Yeah,
opinion?
yeah. I mean, yeah.
Anything to add?
I mean, in terms of.
Don't do that. Don't do that, Kyler. Come on, Kyler.
Let's. What?
You're better than that, bro. Come on.
Hold on, I'm thinking. I feel like there's like so many levels of evidence that are unexplainable that like there's I don't even know what other like argument you could make that would be more solid than the argument that it's real.
Right.
You could just clarify the whole water thing.
Oh yeah, so
You kind of glossed over that.
Yeah, one of the details is that there is blood and water on the side here.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah, so it would have been
water damage, Kailyn?
Yeah. So it would have been in the area where Jesus would have been stabbed.
It's also the fact that it was repaired over time clearly shows that it had held some sort of like significance even way back then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it's like freaking cool.
The only reason
That is
I
really
say
cool.
I'm 95% instead of 100% is just because it's one of those things where I don't want to like set the standard.
Yeah.
I'm just like I'm 100% on the Bible, so I'm not going to equate this to my 100%.
Sure.
Although it
Does that make
is
sense?
interesting that if you're imagining obviously the Gospels are inspired,
Collected.
obviously. The fact that they would all mention the linen cloths as an important detail.
Yeah.
That part actually is, besides all
That
the
is
scientific
interesting.
stuff, the fact that it matches up with the Gospels, that
Right.
is like,
Right.
for me my most
So
radical.
is that like a facial reconstruction kind of idea? That
Yeah, this was a 3D rendering based on the shroud.
Not that it's necessary, but it would make sense that God would want kind of like his image to be carried on through the years as a symbol, you know? I don't know.
I mean, if he already came in an incarnate image and revealed himself to people, wouldn't he be pleased that more people would be able to see his likeness?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Jesus literally took the first photo, bros.
He took the
Actually,
first
that's true
selfie.
though. Yeah.
That's kind of crazy. He's like an
Oh,
innovator.
that is weird. I never thought about that.
It's the first photograph because even if it's a forgery, it's still the first photograph. So
Mm-hmm.
that's
Bro,
a,
that's
Well,
pretty
that
good,
but
bro.
that does
That's
point to
what
the
you want,
question of
bro.
you said this was in the 1200s it was found, right?
It wasn't found. That's when
the
in
written
text
records.
it starts becoming
Okay.
But there's an oral history to it before that.
Sure.
Being able to singularly call, this thing that exists in Turin.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
So, yeah. So
and
the fact
by a person who had been on the crusades, supposedly taking it back from Jerusalem.
The fact that it had that imprint, like, if they can date it that far, and it like, I feel like it kind of proves itself authentic because the technology didn't exist to be able to like
produce it,
do any of like produce it at all.
Yeah.
You can see
have the technology to produce it, and the nature of the medium of it being a photograph,
right?
Confounds
Right.
You can see here, it's super clear in this rendering here how swollen the side of the face is, like he was punched. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can see it here too.
You can see it when you look for it. You can see it really clearly here.
The nose is broken.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's pretty wild.
Wait. So then that means wait. So then that means that we do know what Jesus looks like.
If this is authentic, then yes.
If it's authentic.
Well, and that's also the point, right? Like, doesn't it say somewhere that he was comely or something? That he was just essentially an average person?
Not someone that we should look at him.
Like, looking average looking.
Yeah.
Person.
This is the first time, really, and so the idea is that this icon, like, this is when people started being like, oh, we have to standardize our art basically to make it look
right.
Like this is.
When was that painting made?
This is the 5th century or 6th century. So again, not too late for it to. And so the idea is that the church is consolidating power. It's really only been legal for 150 years or 200 years. And so the idea is now there's a standardization of icons basically. The only ones that exist beforehand before this are really obscure. There's not many images of Jesus before this one, and they're all very obscure.
Right.
And
isn't it weird how over time he gets blue eyes and like light hair?
Well, even in comparison, this is more accurate to his Middle Eastern look, because in earlier ones, like Greek artistic depictions, Jesus actually looked like a Roman, and we all know, of course, he wasn't a Roman. So the point.
Can you guys pull up one of those paintings just to like compare?
So again, the earliest depiction of Jesus is actually going to be this one where he has a donkey for a head, right? This graffiti. This dates back to the first and 2nd century. Okay, so
not a very good artist.
It's kind of interesting because it looks like a child's drawing. It's kind of fun.
The very earliest ones, again, are super obscure. You can't even tell really what he looks like. Yeah. But then this really is the oldest one where you actually have a very clear image.
Well, and it would make sense that the first ones would look Roman or Greek because that was the art period. So it would make sense to copy the art style.
The point of this icon was to get it right and standardize the image,
right?
The vision of Jesus, right?
Right.
And it really does. All of them, if you just look at any icons of Jesus, they all resemble this.
Mm-hmm.
And the point is why did this become the standard, and why does it so perfectly match?
Right.
The Shroud of Turin.
Clearly, a lot of people believed that the shroud was legit.
Yeah, that's the point.
So the artist that painted that referenced the shroud. Is that what he says too?
That's the theory. That's the theory, just because of how it matches, the asymmetry of it.
No, I understand that, but I'm just asking. Is there does it?
No, I mean we're not gonna have writings of the artist from back then. That's not something that we would have. But the analyzing of the details again, and even if you just go back to this slide, the image on the shroud is not composed of any paint, dye, ink, rubbing, or any sort of artistic medium. The bloodstains are real. The blood is from a man who was tortured before his death, evidenced by the bilirubin in the blood. The bloodstains match precisely the descriptions of the wounds of Jesus. You know what I mean? It's like this enough. It's crazy. You know what I mean? It all matches. Wild. You got all of the hundreds of scourge wounds. They've counted these scourge wounds, and they it's in the hundreds. On his front and on his
and you
back.
can even in the wrist wounds, bro. That's wild.
Yeah. Right. So, anyway. Yep.
Pretty sick.
Right,
Sick
and if
with
it was like
photo
if it was like a medieval forgery, the fact that the blood is on the wrists is an interesting fact.
Yeah.
Would they have
Right.
known the fact that that crucifixions would have been done
I don't
in
think
the
they
wrists?
would have. No, I think all of the depictions are always in the palm. Actually, I don't know of any arts.
Look up medieval art of Jesus crucifixion.
Art of Jesus crucifixion. I mean, it's pretty zoomed out, but there's palms.
Yeah,
Palms.
looks like it.
Palms.
Palms sweaty, knees
That-
weak,
I
arms
feel like
heavy.
I feel like that's a good, like, if they're claiming it
That's
was
an
made in
evidence,
the
yeah.
Middle Ages, right? That's a good evidence for it.
Yeah, that means that is not accurate to. It's accurate to history, but not accurate to the depictions of the Middle Ages. That he was crucified in the wrists, not in the palms.
Isn't
Oh,
it?
dude.
Isn't it always been? I mean, the depictions. Yeah. The hasn't it been a well-known fact though that it goes through the wrists? Like that's how the Romans.
I mean that's
Not
a
not
recent
necessarily throughout
knowledge.
history.
No.
No,
I guess more of a recent knowledge is that's
No,
how
that's
they
the point.
crucified them.
Yeah, but not in the Middle Ages. Like,
I think these slides are good too because it's like the point is like look, we like know so many details about the crucifixion. Like, why wouldn't we have we have the burial tomb itself? So like, why is it so far fetched that we would have the burial cloth?
well, and
Anyway.
they call Jesus the image of the invisible God. So he gives us an image for people who come after as well. You know, like, it just makes sense.
Yeah, especially, considering it's become super popular in the modern age in the past 100 years, and we and only now do we have the technology to even fully appreciate it or study it. And the fact that we're such a scientific age that demands so much proof and scientific evidence, it's almost like Jesus is here you go.
Like,
I
okay,
can't,
here you go.
I can't give you any more than
It was
this.
2,000 years ago.
I already gave you this.
You would need it.
Yeah, and now you're seeing it for the first time. I don't know, it's kind of crazy.
Well, we gotta go, guys. It's been fun. Thank you for listening
Yes,
to
It's been
Kailyn's
real.
presentation.
it was fun, guys.
I hope you had a good time.